Welcome to Premium Cashflow Real Estate Investing Podcast with Sakar Cowley. During this program, you will hear guest experts sharing their experiences, best practices, and market insights. We discuss investing in multifamily apartment complexes and how a busy professional can passively invest hassle-free in various opportunities. Your host, Sakar Cowley, owns millions of dollars of assets and has done thousands of value-add projects over 20 years now. So listen in for insights. Here's your host, Sakar Cowley.
Welcome to another edition of Premium Cashflow Podcast. Today, I have one of my favorite guests, Kimberly Radaker-Bays with Exponential Property Group. Welcome to the show, Kimberly.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining. So Kimberly founded and currently is the CEO of Exponential Property Group. She's done so many deals. She currently has a portfolio of 5,000 units, and she done full cycle of about 2,500 unit comprising of 6 deals so far. So today we're going to analyze and learn more about her story. So give us some background, Kimberly, as to how the explosive growth within your company came about, how you got started, and all the good stuff.
Absolutely. So I actually started with some single family. I had spent quite a few years working in the retirement plan industry, and so kind of started with the finance background, and the numbers are kind of my thing. So
sure.
Started with some single families, and then in 2011, in August, we purchased the first property that we ever had. And obviously that was a much easier time in the market cycle.
Sure.
Loans were just becoming available again at that time. And so we were able to acquire a 77-unit property in Irving, Texas. And that one was a fantastic one because according to the spreadsheet, if we raised the occupancy or we were able to hit our rents or we were able to do anything else, of course, we'd hit our targets. Any one of 3 things going right would get it solved. And so that was a fantastic first project for us and a good time to get started. Obviously the market's become a lot tighter as we've grown, but still are able to find some good opportunities for projects and to really benefit both the residents, our employees that have grown along with us, and also the investors that we serve.
Awesome. And I like that sort of mindset that you put together, that you have a team, employees, and your investors grow together. And that's the win-win mindset that I'm always, favorite about. And I always keep talking about it's a win-win relationship and things like that. So Kim, digging into multifamily, right? So why you favor multifamily in a big way over single family? Like, what are your experiences? I know you come from a single family background, so, hence the question.
Sure. I spent some time in single family, but the big thing with multifamily is just that you can get such greater economies of scale, obviously, able to place a lot more money. Every transaction can be difficult. There's difficulties in just extra transactional work that goes into it. So getting, for example, our largest property is 656 units. So getting all of that in one single set of paperwork and transaction is definitely a lot easier than trying to amass that sort of a single family portfolio.
Sure.
Also, it's really helped us build a team. And so we're able to build a team. We've got on-site maintenance, we've got on-site management. And so it's allowed us to expand in a way that would have been much more difficult if everybody was calling me personally every time a dishwasher broke.
Sure. I can relate to it, Kim, that we personally own and manage quite a big portfolio of single family, and we have some apartments and things like that as well. And I perfectly relate to you the fact that having team and people around you who can help with different aspects of the thing, not just, the maintenance and the professional stuff, it's more about leasing, looking at the books and things like that. It's such a team effort that I appreciate you such a detailed answer on it.
Absolutely.
Kim, on that token, when you are evaluating the deals, let's say something comes across your desk currently, I know we are in a tight market. What is your deal criteria? Like what metrics are you looking at when something comes across your desk right now?
Well, we do value add properties. And so the primary metric, I guess we sort of do evaluate things a little bit differently than what a lot of other groups do. The majority of our investors are very, very focused in value creation. And so Really their concern is with increasing net worth, much more so than immediate cash flow. And so we do look for value add properties that can be achieved in any one of a number of ways, through interior renovations, exterior renovations. We've taken on properties that had even 200 down units at one point. So we're just about to finish the very last of those buildings. It's been kind of a 1.5-year effort on that, getting everything back online.
I can imagine.
Because those had actually been down for about 15 years at least that we're aware of.
Wow.
So most of the copper was gone and all sorts of things. So we kind of had to almost start from scratch. It was basically an empty shell, but it allowed us to do some really cool things and modify the floor plans and create a much more modern feel, even though the property had been built a long time ago.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that detail, because that answers my next question, whether you like the light value add versus deep value add. It sounds like your appetite and your capability to take on such, intricate projects, which could be, probably 70-80% vacant and complete distress situations, as we call it. You are absolutely a player in that space, which is phenomenal. And I think we'll go into those spaces where how you use bridge debt, property management, sourcing materials, things like that, managing the the entire project, because it's a beast of its own. Doing a light value add versus something, as you said, 200 unit project, trying to bring online those 200 unit does require a lot of property management skills, sourcing, and there's a lot to learn. Could you maybe give us some background into why you like such deep value add, and how does that excel with respect to something light value add that most commonly you see?
Well, I mean, we've certainly done a lot of projects that are lighter value add, and then we've done some that are really major value add. And really, I think the fact that we do manage internally, that our renovation crews are all direct employees of one of our entities, and that we do source the materials, gives us a unique ability to take on such a deep value add and deal with that level of work and still have the controls and the force in place to make sure that that gets done and gets done well. Certainly, it is not something that I would ever have had, just some third-party management company take over and be like, oh, sure, we'll just hire a contractor, it'll be fine. It has been a much more involved project than that, kind of going back and forth with the city. One of the adventures, I guess, in this process is that when we'd already gotten one building fully online, leased up, and we were working on the final electrical inspection on the second building. And one of the inspectors came through and he said, well, you can't have electrical panels in new construction in the closets. And I said, this section of this property was built in 1974. It's not new construction, but it took quite some time to work with the city and coordinate and get the right inspectors back out there and document everything appropriately so that we were able to then move forward with the rest of the project. So,
Sure. There is a lot of shared love between the operator and the city.
Absolutely.
So give us insight into why the 200 units were down and what were some of the challenges when you went through. And I'm alluding to the fact that not just doing the work, it's the city inspectors, the bureaucracy, and the red tape that goes along with this. And how residents appreciated that, okay, we see a significant new project that came in the neighborhood. Could you maybe give us a full overview on things as to why was there like a neighborhood derelict, or was that some city code enforcement that caused a lot of these issues?
So we don't know the entire story, but the best of what we've been able to figure out, all three phases of this property, it's 656 units total, were at one point owned by a single company. And they had done some renovation to the first two phases. And it appears from what we've seen that they were finally getting to phase 3 and had gotten about halfway done with a boiler chiller conversion to individual HVAC. The electrical panels had been put in, lines had been run for the individual HVAC. And then my guess is they either ran out of money. We know it was in the early 2000s, so could have been related to 9/11, could have been related to stock market crash kind of in 2000, 2001.
Sure.
Could have just been that they under budgeted for what they were going to need. But one way or the other, they eventually, threw back the keys on phase 3. And so the lender foreclosed on that piece of it. So the sellers that I bought from actually own the asset for about 12 years. So they had bought the 2 phases from the prior owner and the third one from the bank. And every year, I think they looked at it because a lot of contractors, when we first were getting some of the bigger contractors and bigger vendors out there during our due diligence process, they're like, I've been to this property every year. Nobody ever does anything with the bids that I give them. I just chase around for hours and then don't actually get anywhere with it. And we're like, you guys know us. We've been good customers. And they said, yes, for sure. We know that's true. And so they were willing to look at it for us one more time. And so I think really the owners that we purchased from, it was a family out of California. They had no loan on the property. They just owned it for cash. So they didn't have a lender making sure that they moved things forward. And I think they must have kind of come to some sort of a gentleman's agreement between them and the city that said, if we keep up the exterior, you'll ignore the fact that the interior is a disaster and non-habitable and everything else. So really just being, out-of-state owners and far away from the project, they just never actually took it on. They always kind of intended to get around to it and then never actually took it on. And so, like I said, over those years, so we know for sure it was vacant for 15 years, but we don't know prior to that.
Wow. And these 200 units, Kim, how many buildings does this comprise of?
It's, I guess, 9 buildings. Really, they're numbered as 8 buildings for some strange reason, but there's 2 building 48s. That both sides of the pool are building 48, and I have no idea why. But so I guess 9 buildings, and mostly small 1-bedrooms, but we have some 2-bedrooms as well in that section. And like I said, the really cool thing about this project is that we were able to go in and remove the teeny tiny kitchens that were there. And by taking out a wall, we opened them up into L-shaped island kitchens. So even though they're only like, 500, 600 square foot units, we were able to really, it's just an entirely different animal.
Absolutely. An open modern layout. You open the door, you see the kitchen with, the queen of the house is happy to rent instantly.
Absolutely.
And what does this do to your sort of bottom line, like as to what you bought versus what are your projections looking like? Once you're done, you lease it up and all that, what sort of valuations are you looking at?
Once we lease it up, we should be able to well exceed our 100% capital gain goal, which is kind of what we target when going into a project. So we should be able to well exceed that. The income on the property, as far as just rental income, will increase over $250,000 a month. So that's it's a really big difference.
Sure. Absolutely. it's a massive undertaking, and congratulations from bringing it to the finish line.
Thank you.
So moving on, Kim, that you did light value add, you've done, the deep value add, as I call it, right? What are your sort of now the criteria as to what you were used to look at, like smaller deals, mid-sized deals, and now, with the company that you've grown, it brings, additional sort of constraints of staffing and legal and all sorts of administrative things. What sort of deal criteria are you looking at? Let's say, the rent differential, or whether it's valuations and things like that. Could you maybe give us some insights into that?
Well, a lot of the things that we can do as far as value add, we've found that it comes in many, many different places. Sure. Obviously, a lot of it can just be improved management. One property that we just recently purchased is another really large property. The prior ownership group actually did some renovation to the property, but the first third-party management company they had really kind of ran it into the ground and didn't operate it correctly. And so they had occupancy drop. And so once they replaced the management company, occupancy went back up, but because they had to do such an extreme lease up, they hadn't kept up with a lot of the market rent increases for the past couple of years. And so we were able to just basically walk in the door day one, because they had gotten it leased up by the time we actually closed, and are seeing, $140 more in some cases for certain units than what they were leasing for even just days beforehand. So there's a lot that can be done on the management side. Obviously, because we specialize in the interior renovations, between our materials import business and the renovation crew that we have in-house, That's obviously a big piece of it. So we look for properties that could use the interior renovations. That's definitely a big thing that we look for. And then obviously just looking for stuff that's going to hit our metrics and hit the investor returns that we try to provide.
Sure. Let's go there in terms of we alluded to a couple of times that you source the material internally and internationally more so. Could you maybe give us a full overview on what you source, what are the cost benefits, and how, like obviously when you're sourcing the material internationally, I know you're obviously buying in volume, so you have to have the space that you can store it in a warehouse and yada yada yada. Could you maybe give us a full overview on what that sort of operation looks like? I don't know if it's an entity of its own or how do you go about that?
It is an entity of its own. That's Exist Multifamily is now what that's called. And so we do supply materials to other owners as well. But anyway, that business started in 2012. We sold that first property, which was a 77 unit property. And the next property we bought was actually 244 units.
You just went 4 times from that.
Yeah, just go big or go home, right? It's Texas.
Sure, absolutely.
So anyway, so we went into a 244 unit property, and that property was our first foray into the true deep value add, I suppose. Didn't really have quite as many down units. There was really just one building that had some flooding issues before that really needed a ton of work, but it just had not been well cared for at all. And at the time that we purchased it, it was only 50% occupied. A lot of that and obviously the clientele that we had in that 50% was not exactly the ideal clientele, because a few months before we bought the property, both boilers went out at one point, and there was no hot water for the property for 30 days.
Oh my goodness.
Imagine that the people that stayed through that were not of the highest caliber of residents. So anyway, we were very, very fortunate through a local organization. We had met some close friends that became investors with us. And she is a Chinese national. And so we just started talking to her, another investor that we're close friends with that had done the loans on the first 2 properties. He likes to say that he sort of founded our materials company. He told me one time, I was processing some draw requests for one of my other loans today, and this guy buys stuff from China and it's cheaper. You should do that.
Sure.
Okay, sure, no problem. So a little bit complicated, but on that particular project, especially with the 244 units, we were going to need hundreds of thousands of square feet of vinyl plank flooring. And so that was the first item that we went over and sourced, and that worked very, very well. We still use that vendor today. And also sourced a few other things. We got some tile back then, got some doorknobs that were horrible and didn't really work, and mostly ended up throwing that $6,000 away. Able to get some cabinet hardware. And so then it just kind of developed from there as we got towards the end of that project and went under contract on a 444 unit property, which is our third property, is really when we rented the first warehouse space. And that was just 2,500 square feet in a kind of strip warehouse. And then we've expanded over the years and now have 10,000 square feet. And at the end of the year, we'll be moving into a 30,000 square foot facility, because we've really grown that side of the business, grown what we carry, the selection of what we offer. We also now are doing signage and branding, and we've got a blind cutter coming in so that we'll be able to custom cut the faux wood blinds instead of just ordering them to size. So it's been a cool adventure on that. Several trips over to China, which is an interesting place to be.
Awesome. You are absolutely exponential and true to your name, and I want to congratulate you. I think you have a fantastic, inquisitive, opportunistic mind, where I think someone mentions a small idea and it needs a lot of intelligence and inquisitiveness to kind of ask more questions, explore, research more. And personally, not to go off on my own story, but that's how I am. If someone tells me like something new, I'm like, okay, tell me more about it. How does this work? I want to know the ins, the outs, what are the challenges and things like that. And for you to, I think, go into that tangent, I just want to congratulate you, because there are a lot of people who are talking, but there are not that many people doing. And obviously doing it to a scale that you have done it's phenomenal. And do you find a lot of investors, obviously, that you have relations with and things like that, they regularly come to you, and that becomes sort of another source for them to purchase the materials from? Is that how sort of that?
Absolutely. So, I mean, it just sort of started that we were going to get a warehouse because we needed to store stuff for ourselves.
Sure.
And then a couple of our friends were like, hey, can we buy some of the stuff too? And so it basically has grown mostly just on word of mouth. We're only just now really starting to push the growth side of that at all. As far as that separate entity.
Right. So you're sourcing, I guess, all the stuff that goes on the interior, whether it's fixtures, doorknobs, I guess faucets, granite.
Faucets, light fixtures, granite. We've got the exterior LED wall pack lights now. That was a recent addition because we were needing a lot of those for our 2,000 unit portfolio we bought last year. All of the bath hardware, custom glass tile backsplash.
So you are pretty well versed in reading and speaking Chinese now. Is that what?
No, not at all.
But mostly.
Ni hao is about the extent of my knowledge, but it's actually very good. Most of our vendors speak English, or at least have somebody that speaks English very well. And we actually do have a contractor that we met on one of the trips over to China. So she helps do some consulting and goes and checks on various shipments and things for us, and
true.
adds some correspondence for us.
Absolutely, you have to have that liaison that you can work with, and it's pretty interesting that back home, I'm from India, and a family is a big time, almost in my hometown. They are one of the top 3 builders, and that's how they do it. Every time they'll do a new construction of apartment buildings and things like that, they will just go into China and buy material, and they have these regular sources where the liaison, or the building material liaison as they call it, they'll set it up. They'll go into, okay, you want a contemporary furniture or traditional looking, and it's just, I mean, it's such a thriving business. It's an incredible model. What sort of cost savings you are seeing by doing this, Kim?
I would say that we save internally for our projects probably 30 to 40% off of what we could get just purchasing directly from a domestic vendor. So it really does provide substantial cost savings.
Sure. So for our listeners, to put it in perspective, an entry grade granite, as we all probably know, comes around in that $29 to $30 per square feet. That's kind of generally the entry range. So typically you would expect to see this granite that you can offer perhaps maybe around $20 or $15. Would that be a fair statement?
Actually, we use the 2 centimeter granite because it's a lot easier to work with in the units, but we are able to source that for well under $10 a square foot.
Incredible.
We're actually able to put granite in units now for about the cost of 1.5 to 2 resurfacings, depending on the size of the kitchen.
Wow.
So,
wow.
That's made a huge difference.
That is incredible.
It's a ton in turn costs over the course of time.
That is incredible. And I cannot imagine an appraiser coming through and looking at your units and saying what the value of these units is. And I mean, you always hear that cha-ching, cha-ching every time you do these renovations. Wow. I'm super pumped to know your story. Thank you for sharing that. So analyzing the P&Ls that you see, Kim, for our new investors, could you maybe share some tips about when someone is looking at a P&L for a large apartment building? What sort of metrics you look at? Is the staffing appropriate? Do they have the contracting services, like whether it's snow removal, asphalt, things like that? All of that, are they appropriate with the size of the building and things like that? Could you maybe share some tips about what your experiences have been around that?
Sure, absolutely. Being in Texas, one of the really nice things is there's not a snow removal line.
Absolutely.
Right now, which we very much appreciate. I did look at some financials for a property up in Kansas City a couple of years back, and I saw snow removal expense, and I was like, wow.
What is that?
Yeah, I remember living up north and having snow.
Absolutely,
I hadn't
absolutely.
even thought about that being on the financials, but yes.
Absolutely, and with snow comes the freezing pipes and everything, and that's another thing you got to worry about.
Absolutely.
But,
One of the things that I see a lot in terms of analyzing properties, or something to watch out for, is depending on how the broker put together a package in the OM. Sometimes they'll oftentimes say, go do your water conservation, you drop your water bill by so much and whatever else. So one of the things I always watch for is to make sure that in any of those projections, we also have that the RUBS and the water bill back to the residents are going to drop as well. Because
Sure.
that is something that people look at, they're like, oh yeah, no, the other income's great. Well, yes, but if you cut the water bill by 50%, you can only bill a certain percentage back legally, at least in Texas. And so, so making sure that that other income also gets offset by things. Staffing wise, I mean, obviously we have our own set of kind of general staffing criteria, but look at the seller's financials, make sure that it seems like everything is adequately covered. Make sure that we're using our own numbers as far as medical insurance, what our workman's comp, all of those kind of expenses are. Utilities can definitely be a big place to save. Like I said, with the water conservation, that's a huge piece of any project that we take on.
Sure.
Other things to watch for is just kind of how much is being spent on advertising, and is that advertising budget based on the location of the property? What kind of clientele are you trying to attract? So all of those kind of things. Really looking for what the city fees are, because those can vary wildly from city to city,
Sure,
even in local area.
So with city fees, what are you referring to? Are you referring to taxes or some citations and things like that that come along the way, or any?
It's mostly just the annual inspections and multifamily licenses.
Sure.
Some cities, you know, it's $5, $6, $10 a unit annually, and there's other cities that are closer to $40 or $50 per unit annually.
I see.
So
Absolutely.
those can definitely spread a little bit. And our tax rate is high in Texas, and so that's probably that and payroll are the two biggest line items on any P&L down here. And so really watching for that, keeping on top of the tax protest can make a huge difference as to whether, as Texas is a non-disclosure state, that can make a huge difference as to whether you're profitable or not, honestly.
Right. And regarding staffing, Kimberly, what are your criteria? Like, are you maybe saying that, hey, I need a per unit, like let's say 50 to 70 units, I need one leasing staff, one maintenance staff. How do you go about that?
So it obviously varies quite a bit by property size.
Sure.
What we found is usually things that are kind of in the mid 200s to low 300s. Oftentimes manager, assistant manager, and one leasing in the office. On occasion, an extra part-time leasing, just depending on if you're open 7 days and kind of how the traffic flow is.
Sure.
And then usually about 3 maintenance outside. Then of course on some of our larger properties at 650, we've got 3 leasing agents. We've got 5 in the office and then 6 out on the sites between the porter and the lead maintenance and all of our technicians.
I see. Awesome. Thank you for clarifying that. And now, Kim, you are a proponent of, purchasing the units, managing them internally. Could you maybe kind of give us some benefits as to, obviously there's lower costs, some are obvious, but through your years of ownership and management, could you maybe sort of enlighten us as to, when you started, you did not think it will turn that way, but as year went on, like, could you maybe explain us like some of the stories and some benefits that you have seen by actually, operating it, whether it's tenant satisfaction, lower cost savings and things like that. Could you maybe give us some insights into it?
Absolutely. So we were fortunate that we were able to start with the very first property with our own management company. And so at that point we had 2 employees. One manager, one maintenance guy on that first 77 units, and now we've grown to about 170 across all of the various entities, including the renovation crew and the materials import business. But I think the biggest thing for me on having the property management internally is just that we have so much more control over the entire process. If you have a third-party management company, things could go pretty far awry before you're really willing to make that change. You
Sure.
might even have to do entire changes in personnel if you switch management companies, or perhaps
Right.
a software conversion and other things that can be really disruptive to the business. And probably if you were making that change, it would be at a time when the business had already been somewhat disrupted. And so
Sure.
I think that's really the biggest thing, is just having the great deal of insight and control into it. You know, knowing that our entire accounting team and our controller have all been trained up by me to look through the financials, how things ought to be coded, where things need to be, how we need to manage the money, making sure, and a lot of it too is just making sure that the employees are treated well.
Sure.
That's a huge piece of what we do, and the benefit that we provide is to give people jobs. And so we want to make sure that they are given a good place to work and good benefits, and that we really kind of build that team in all aspects of things. And so I think those are a lot of the reasons that it's been really helpful for us to have it in-house. I mean, sure, there's definitely some cost savings that come along with it, but I think really the biggest thing is just being able to have the access to everything so that you can dig into the details. If anything isn't going quite as planned, you can immediately kind of dive in, dig into the details, go talk to the staff, find out what's going on, so that you can make much smaller changes much faster.
Absolutely.
In order to improve the property.
Absolutely. And thank you. And one of the points I think you mentioned also, which I want to again highlight, is that momentum factor that, you know, you got different systems, different cultures. And if that's sort of that property management piece is given to someone else, just trying to shift the entire wagon of things can be such a difficult undertaking, that you got different cultures of how people work and things like that. It's almost like makes your job double difficult to come back and turn it around. Just so the fact that, you know, you instill your own management and you go from strength to strength to strength is, I find it extremely valuable. And speaking from experience, that I see so many, mistakes that are done, things that, you know, on the ground are different, and different companies are, probably just misstating to different owners. And there's just so much cost savings and control that you said is such a classic thing that you want to have. And I think the bigger the deals, I think there's a lot on the sort of riding on your back, so to speak, you know. Kim, moving on, your company has scaled. Obviously your executive leadership team has scaled as well. You probably have different division heads that are doing different things at this point. So what I want to sort of delve into is your day-to-day things that you are challenged about. And obviously someone at your core of strength that you have, and the platform that you have today, there's always that struggle about, how do I move my company forward? What sort of systems, what sort of my next vision would be? Could you maybe give us some insights into what are your day-to-day challenges? What sort of 2-year, 3-year, 5-year plans are you looking for? Could you maybe give us the entire scheme of things with this?
Sure, absolutely. So I guess the big changes is in 2017, we actually sold 3 properties and bought 3 properties. And some of those transactions were a little bit challenging. I guess that would be putting it pretty mildly, I suppose. And so just really at that point, I got to a place where I realized that too much of my executive team was really kind of at red line. At that point, it was really kind of 3 of us that were primarily responsible for most of the biggest management decisions. And so when we were doing that many transactions, it was just really pushing all of us kind of to red line. And with 6 in a year, there wasn't really enough time between the things to kind of recoup. And so the biggest thing we were trying to figure out is kind of, where do we go from here? We'd been hovering kind of right in that 2,000 unit mark for several years. And so we made the decision that the best way to do that was to scale up and get bigger, so that we could bring in additional talent to take some of those things off and kind of spread the load a little bit.
Sure. So let me ask you a follow-up in that in between there, Kim, is that,
sure.
Did that meant that you had to let some management team go and replace somebody with, bigger, better scaling mentality? Or was that just a pure addition of new blood into the team? Could you maybe
Just a pure addition, thankfully, at this point. So
okay,
that's
okay. Mm-hmm.
It's been great to just add to the team and kind of spread the load further.
Mm-hmm.
But we've been able to keep at least the core group of us together and growing together, and kind of it's a labor of love for all of us. So, but we have expanded the team pretty substantially. So last year we actually acquired a 2,000 unit portfolio.
Awesome.
And in many ways, it was almost an acquisition of another company very similar to ourselves, because we were kind of going from 2,200 units and adding an extra 2,000 on top of that.
Wow, that's like doubling the size.
Right. It was an out-of-country owner, but that actually had his own management company, and he was selling his whole portfolio. And so one of the things that we loved about that was that they had been sort of run with that same sort of family atmosphere that we try to provide to all of our team members here. And so we were able to acquire virtually all of the staff with the properties.
I see. And was that an off-market transaction, Kim?
No, that one was on market. Kind of a funny story about that one. Actually, in 2017, it originally hit the market, and we started analyzing and looking at it at that time. And then it got pulled from the market due to some tax law changes, and then put back on in 2018. But we were very, very fortunate that we were able to eventually win out on that one, and we got to know the owners a little bit through the process, and so we were able to double our team through that acquisition of that portfolio. And that's been a huge game changer for us, because that really let us grow big. But then I think the big thing to sort of target to your question is the biggest struggle for me was how to keep a handle on everything without having my hands in everything, now that it had scaled up that much.
To put it mildly.
Yeah, so that was probably the biggest thing for me. And so it's been a real time of kind of personal and company growth, as far as adjusting to my own kind of new role, that I have to step back a little bit from some of the details that I used to be more involved in, and really kind of train up and build up the next layer of leadership to handle a lot of things. And so I think that's been a fantastic process. Actually, one of the big blessings, read the book called Traction this last fall. And so we've been implementing EOS here at our company, and that's made a huge difference. As much as I am somebody that I would have always said I hate meetings, that's actually been getting kind of all of that coordinated has really made a huge difference in terms of what we've been able to do, getting everybody on the same page, rolling things down, getting everybody rowing in the same direction. It's been
absolutely. That's such a favorite book. It's always next to my nightstand, along with that book, The One Thing, and I think The Millionaire Mindset. There are like few staple books that I always keep, that you know, whatever time I have, I'll kind of read through it again and again. It's
read back through stuff. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely, absolutely.
That's been great. That's the biggest thing we've done as far as trying to really get everybody coherent now that it is a little bit bigger. We actually have added I've had my director of operations with me for over 4 years now, and she's incredible. She runs the property management side of the business. But so a big piece of this growth has been getting her help as well. So we've brought in 2 additional regionals that report up to her. And so those are a lot of the things that we're doing to make sure that the front line still feel the love that we have for them, even though it's less often that we're able to make it to every site.
Right. Let's take a few minutes, Kim, if you may. Explain us that chronology, or sort of that whole state of things that went along. You went from, let's say, a 77 unit to the largest number of units that you have now. You probably started from, let's say, operating on your dining table, now having an office, executive assistant, and things like that. Now you have regional heads. Could you maybe give us a sort of a chronology of how things scaled up and how you grew your management team around it? And the reason I'm asking that question, Tim, is that there are always, operators that I have seen who grow from a owner mindset to an asset management mindset, and it's a different mindset of how you look at things, and that you're looking at, from being an operator of multifamily properties to a sort of a steward mentality, where you're saying that I'm a fiduciary of my investors. I have to look at the performance, and to do that, I need to have all of that executive staff that is having eyes and ears on all the operations. Could you maybe give us an insight on how your staff and the executive leadership grew through the years?
Sure. So Natasha, I actually met a little over 4 years ago. She's been on the team for 4 years now, and that's been probably the biggest asset, really finding her and connecting. I was looking for a regional manager. We'd gotten to a size of about 1,000 units where we were going to be able to really bring that on and kind of get myself out of that role, because I used to kind of do a little bit of everything.
Sure.
So the really cool thing about that is that, I asked her kind of what she loved to do, and she loves the marketing and she loves the HR side and she loves being out with the teams. And she's like, I can do it, but I just don't really like the financials. And I was like, well, I love the financials and I'm not really fond of the HR side. So, so it's just been a match made in heaven. So she was kind of the first key piece. And then I brought in another team member, Amanda, who she and I have actually been best friends since 8th grade. And I convinced her to move here from Florida. And so she kind of came here originally as an admin, if you will, and has grown to where she's now director of investor services. So she keeps all the investors very, very spoiled and makes sure that they all get responded to quickly and all their questions get answered, and, resets logins for the portal and all of those things whenever that needs to be done. Then we've now added, I guess, especially with the import side of the business growing, with Exist growing. So we now have chief marketing officer for that side that also helps with a lot of our design and marketing on this side of the business. My husband now has joined the team, and he sort of runs that whole Exist import graphics construction side of things. And so that's been great. We've got a vice president of acquisitions that joined us late last year to really kind of take off some of that transactional load.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
I think asset management being an important piece of it as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love the fact that I think you are growing your team and looking at, how the existing staff can scale up, like someone who's at an admin position can become a head manager with training and things like that, which
absolutely,
which speaks to the inclusive culture and, how you look at sort of, for the greater benefit of all the people around you. And honestly, I think that's the success mantra right there, that you let other people win and, you see how the company grows. I think it's been awesome. So thank you, Tim. I appreciate you sharing so many insights. Tim, with a couple of last questions there, Kim, is that with the size of your company that has grown now, where do you get this inquisitive hunger that you want to grow to that next level? Where does that hunger come from? Is that like set goals that you have, or where do you bring that hunger?
Well, I'm definitely more goal elusive than most people that have grown as fast as I have been, which is a little odd. The hardest thing that they ever had to do with me with the EOS was get me to set a 10-year target, because I don't normally try to think that far ahead. But I think the biggest thing is a couple of my friends have asked me over time, how much is enough? And one of them was one of our early investors that now has gone on to own several apartment properties himself. And he said, well, how much is enough? And I said, Brian, honestly, I passed enough somewhere in the middle of the night one night. There was almost nothing, and then something finally sold, and then there was, more than enough for everything. But but I think the big thing is this has sort of become my vocation. This is what I can do in order to make the world a better place. I can give people a better place to live. I can give people a good job and ability to grow. One of the unique things about us is we actually encourage our employees to invest when they can. So we've gotten employees investing so that they're securing their future in that way. And then the big thing is just the investors. We have been unique in that all of our investors are just individual people.
Right.
And so by having those individual people, we've gotten to see so many really cool transformational stories, and people that have been able to take trips they never thought they'd be able to take, or send their kids to college without debt. So really that's kind of the why now. And then we're also looking at starting a foundation. So we're still working on the paperwork, so it's in the earlier stages, but I have twin boys that have autism. And so that's one of the other big goals, is just as long as we can build this in a way that everybody's enjoying it and enjoying running it and what we're doing, it's able to really improve the lives of a whole lot of people. And so hopefully we'll at some point make a good sized dent in some of the autism issues as well.
Awesome, awesome. I think you see the world from a place and a lens of love, which is phenomenal, Kim. I want to really congratulate you because I think, as you said, that you encourage your employees to invest. I mean, think about like someone saying, hey, just, encouraging someone that, hey, just invest 10,000 into this. You will see the growth, and you will see that
Absolutely.
your 10,000 becomes like 30, 40, 50,000 in less than, 3 years. And
Right.
imagine that person, whether that's maintenance staff and things like that, what that does to his family. I mean,
Absolutely.
I just want to congratulate you on that. And other, I think that sort of a very important aspect on that is that the ownership mentality that comes and the loyalty that comes from employees, that cannot you cannot sort of substitute that even by a higher pay. Like when someone
Oh,
says that,
absolutely.
oh, my owner got my back, they recently invested on my behalf and things like that. And these people working hard and going to that extra mile, keeping the customers satisfied, whether it's working that extra 15 minutes an hour, things like that, and making sure, whether it's simple landscaping and things like that. Just so many untold stories that uh, that go around this, that loyalty and that ownership that brings from the employees is just irreplaceable. I mean, I cannot, congratulate you enough on that. Just one last question now, Kim, is that what are your sort of your goals, your habit of success? That what do you do daily that I think keeps you fresh in this?
Um, I don't know. I guess just working hard for the most part has been
Mhm.
a huge piece of it. I suppose in some ways I feel like I've accomplished things that should have been impossible by just continually putting one foot in front of the other. Try to just keep a really positive outlook on things and try to make a difference wherever I can and touch people wherever I can. And I know everybody kind of says they care about people, but I just genuinely want to make a difference and want the world to be a better place and want to positively impact people's lives. And so that's
Absolutely.
been a really huge piece of it. That's kind of what does keep me going every day, is just try to figure out, okay, how do we do this? And
Right.
one of the things that I kind of always caution some investors that are just getting started in this, particularly when they're syndicating, is
Mhm.
understand that first of all, property management is not easy. I wouldn't have it any other way. I wouldn't have it outsourced to anybody else, but
Sure,
it's
sure.
not always an easy thing. And so the big thing is understanding what you're getting into from that perspective
Right.
and really building the team to be able to do it well. Because as soon as you're taking somebody else's money, that is a huge fiduciary duty. And so,
Absolutely, absolutely. And you touched upon, Kim, a very important aspect of these things where, I continually ask, other operators as well, is that there's a notion out there that, oh, you can, just partner and get into syndications and go into bigger multifamily properties. And sort of my personal opinion is that you have to understand, the all aspects of, just the real estate in general. And perhaps doing some renovation single family is sort of a good way to get your feet wet and then transition into the big boys play. Well, would you maybe comment on that, Kim?
no, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, kind of just scaling up, paying it. I mean, the biggest thing is just really paying attention. I mean, I oftentimes tell people, I fully understand that every single night when I go to sleep, I am responsible on some level for not only my family's financial future, but also for that of close to 400 in our entire investor pool across all the different projects and
Mhm.
170 employees. So that is something that you have to take seriously and really spend time in and make sure that you build the right team and that it's the right people paying attention. Active investing is definitely not a passive sport. So uh, I think that's probably the biggest thing. And there's a lot of people out there that do it very, very well.
Mhm.
I'm very pleased to be friends with a lot of other investors that are
Sure.
active in the space
Mhm.
and that also syndicate and other things. But that is something that I always tell people when they're like, oh, I want to go buy a property and I'm going to syndicate it and everything else. I'm like, be careful. You need to know what you're
I
getting
know.
yourself into. I
Be
wouldn't have
careful.
it any other way. I love it.
Absolutely. And I think that should be the tweet that should be highlighted, is that active investments is not a passive sport. Do not
There you go.
not take this lightly. And with that, Kim, I know you are pressed for time. I truly appreciate you joining today. I think I'm going to probably delve into a lot more interesting topics with you on a future podcast.
I would love that.
I think there's going to be such a value that all the investors new and experience can learn from you with the growth that you have done. So I appreciate you taking time today.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Premium Cashflow Real Estate Investing Podcast. Please join us at premiumcashflow.com to sign up for weekly updates, research articles, and more. We will see you again for another great interview with an expert guest.